Hey, hello everybody. It's I'm going to give it a few minutes to allow everyone an opportunity to join the call. I hope I don't have technology problems this week. It last week was not so great with technology, and we're working on actually even improving the technology and this production. But it'll take us some time to get all that figured out. For example, I've got a bunch of data that I'm going to talk about tonight when I talk about inflation, and it would be nice to post it up here, but we've got to figure out how to work all that. So yeah, I'm going to talk about inflation tonight and what happened and how we got here and what we can do to fix it. So you might remember that about a year ago when inflation was appearing, that the Biden administration was saying, oh, it's going to be transitory, temporary. And in fact, one of the things President Biden said was that his experts and his economists and people were advising him that it would be transitory. And of course, that's turned out not to be the case. In all of this, and I'll talk about this some through the presentation, as I was looking at this stuff, I was asking myself, what's going on? Why? What's the motivation? And I think a lot of it goes back to this whole idea of what is Build Back Better. This certainly is not better what we're seeing, and this idea of a great reset and what's that all about. And I'm starting to believe there's some bad intent, bad motivation here, and I'll talk more about that. So to talk about inflation, one of the things I did is I went back and I looked at the late 70s and the early 80s, and when you hear this is the highest inflation in 40 years, well, that's what they're talking about. It was the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency, and then President Reagan won the election in 1980. But the inflation rate when in 1980 got as high as 14.8%. 14.8% inflation. The other thing about that time is interest rates were I think 18 or 19%. So in fact, when and there's a lot of panic now about the mortgage rates going up, and I think they're at like 5.5% now. That feels high, I get it, but back then they were 13-14%. So we've been here before, caused by a Democrat president, and we're here now. So what happened? What caused this? Well, I think a couple things. I believe the most significant contributor to inflation is the price of a barrel of oil, and we see it in the cost of a gallon of gasoline. But if you look at the price of a barrel of oil and think about what happened to the oil industry, and let me point out a few things about that for you. The right before the pandemic started, So March 2020, the United States was producing 12.8 million barrels of oil a day. That was a high mark. It was a little higher late in 2019, but it was right around there. 12.8 million barrels of oil a day. And that's when we had oil independence. And in fact, we were a net exporter of oil. So the pandemic hits, everything gets shut down, demand goes down. Heck, the price of oil went down. There were days that the price of oil was negative, that the oil companies were paying people to store oil. But it was $16 negative, very low during the rest of 2020. And you all have heard Democrats criticize. Let me do something here, see if I can see these comments better. You have all heard the Democrats criticize the oil companies for their profits that they made in 2021. And they did. They made a lot of money. It doesn't mean they were profiteering. But if you look at 2020, the 5 biggest oil companies lost a total of $75 billion. $75 billion in 2020. So the oil companies were getting hammered because of the pandemic in 2020. And what else happened in 2020 to the oil companies? Joe Biden was running for president, and he was saying that he was going to shut down fossil fuels. He was going to shut down the oil companies. And the combination of those two things caused them to change their business model. And then of course we spent a bunch of money in 2020 because of the pandemic. But, and this is important, by the end of 2020, GDP went way down, but by the end of 2020, GDP was coming back up. The economy was rebounding. We were coming out of the pandemic. Economic activity was picking up. I think the fourth quarter was 38% increase in GDP, but it had dropped dramatically too. So by the end of 2020, the economy was coming back. We get into 2021, and Biden swore in his presidency. One of the first things he does is he shuts down the oil leasing. He cranks up the regulation on drilling, makes it much more difficult to get permits. So the demand for oil was going up because of the economy was coming back, and the oil companies were not in a position to supply it. So that kind of ignited inflation. And then you add into that, you might remember that in March 2021, Biden passed the American Rescue Plan, which was $1.9 trillion, that got shoved into a recovering economy. So you had oil at a low supply, you had increased demand, you had people with a lot of money to spend and more money coming in to the economy, and therefore demand going up. So that ignited inflation. It really set it off, and the price of oil started going up, and as we know, the price of oil impacts so many things in our economy. So many things. Not only the price of gas at the pump, but the goods we buy at stores, they've got to get transported. There's many things are produced, need petroleum. So it impacts a lot of things. So demand high, supply low, oil impacting it, and inflation takes off. Now I want to point out something. I mentioned the American Rescue Plan, that was $1.9 trillion that was shoved into the economy that really wasn't needed at the time. You have probably heard Joe Biden talk about how the deficit, he's going to reduce the deficit this year in the greatest amount it's ever been reduced. And that's true. But the reason he's able to do that is because he got the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan passed in 2021, which added to the deficit. It was up about the deficit was about $3 trillion, I want to say. And so he added to the deficit, and that $1.9 trillion is going 2022. That's not there's nothing like that in the budget. So we're not spending that kind of money, and therefore the deficit will be reduced. And he takes a lot of credit for that. And it's kind of the old sayings, the arsonist starts the fire and then he wants credit for putting it out. So we had this ignited, and then of course the infrastructure bill was passed. That was about $2 trillion, and it really wasn't infrastructure. So all that was adding to inflation at the time, and it kept going and going and going and going, and as we see today, it's over 9%. And what are we hearing? We're hearing, this stuff about buying an electric vehicle, and what did Buttigieg say the other day? You gotta withstand a little pain to take advantage of buying an electric vehicle. I gotta tell you, that's where all of this about climate change and transition to sustainables and the pain that's being inflicted is in my opinion, it is an effort by the elitist, by the leftists to gain control. Listen, if we don't have energy and we don't have freedom of movement, we lose our freedom. And I think they want that control over the population. I do a lot of reading on climate change. I am by no means an expert. I think I'm going to do one of these on climate change at some point. I would urge everybody to there's some good videos out, and look at both sides of the issue. That's what I do. And it's, there is climate change. The question is, to what extent is the climate change the result of man's activity? And I think they call it anthropogenic climate change. And there are many scientists out there that say, hi Victoria, that say climate change, we just don't know what's caused it. And we can't determine if it's man-made. There's scientists out there that say, No, this has nothing to do with man's activities. And then there's some scientists that say this is entirely caused by man. And it's funny. I'm doing this tonight inside because last time I did it outside. I was going to do it outside tonight, but I looked at the weather and said that we're supposed to get thunder showers. There's no thunder showers. So point is, we have a hard time predicting the weather, let alone ascertaining why the earth is warming. And the earth warms, it's warmed, it's cold throughout its existence. But I'll do one of these on climate change. But the point is, I think that is being used to create more control over us, and it's not a good thing. So anyway, we've got this inflation that is just raging now, and I know some analysts are saying we might have reached peak inflation. I don't know. So now I think much of this is self-inflicted. Too much government spending, too much regulation. That's the other. I think I mentioned Biden came in and just cranked down the regulation on the oil and gas industry as well as other business. It costs money. And all of this, makes it more difficult, more expensive for businesses to provide supply their goods and services. And so demand's way up. There's a lot of money, supply's down. So how do you solve this? Well, I think Ronald Reagan's formula for solving this is the exact right formula here. And one thing we got to do is, fiscal policy. We have to stop spending money. It is ridiculous the amount of money that the federal government spends. When I was running for U.S. Senate 2 years ago, the U.S. budget, hold on a second. I got a question here. Tom DeYoung says, who really believe in the green? Yeah, well, why can't they set a good example? That's a good question, Tom. I'll talk about that in a minute. But fiscal policy, how much the government spends. When I was running 2 years ago, the federal budget was about $4.3 trillion, $4.4 trillion. Deficits were $900 billion. I think it touched $1 trillion one year. Now the projections are that the federal government is going to be spending over the coming years over $6 trillion. So what's happened is the federal government, has taken the crisis of the pandemic as an opportunity to spend more money and then continue to spend more money. So our deficits will be even bigger, and so we've got to reduce government spending, and reduce the amount of that money that goes in the economy. The other thing we need to do is we need to cut taxes, and if you cut taxes, you're going to have incentive for small businesses, medium-sized businesses to and big businesses to produce more, to create more supply, and employ more people, and which will then get the supply and demand in balance. The other thing we got to do is reduce government regulation, all things that Ronald Reagan did. So that's fiscal policy and what can happen with the president. And then, of course, we've got to tighten the money supply. Paul Volcker did it back then. I hope this Fed can do it. it looks like they're moving in that direction. But it's a little bit different now with the quantitative easing, which is essentially the government ever since the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. They started this quantitative easing, which is essentially the government buying bonds, buying corporate bonds, buying mortgage-backed securities, and now the Federal Reserve owns like $9 trillion of that debt. They bought it up, and they're still buying it. They're ratcheting down how much they buy, but they just have to stop it, because by them buying it, it infuses more money into the economy. So all those things working together, I think, are what are needed to solve this. And the Democrats aren't going to do it. They are not going to do it, and that's why we got to get conservative Republicans elected. I mean, one of the things I discovered when I was running for office is, there's a lot of Republicans out there that aren't conservative. They're more moderate, and they'll spend just about as much as Democrats. So we need to get good, solid, conservative Republicans who believe in getting the spending down elected. And we have these elections coming up. We have primaries coming up. I urge everybody to go vote, and no matter who wins the primary, whether it's your candidate or not, go out and support the winner, and let's get Republicans elected. Now, this question about why aren't these people setting a good example on this climate change stuff? And it is disgusting. It is really disgusting that these folks are preaching to us about climate change and our cars and the internal combustion engine and go buy an electric vehicle, and then they go off and fly around in their private jets and have gigantic houses, and so it is so hypocritical. But it reflects, I think, how the elitists think. I think it reflects that they think they're smarter than everybody. They think, and it goes back to this whole idea of a great reset and that stuff, that they're so smart they can create a country that is better than what we had. And in order for them to be able to create a country that's better than what we have, you and I have to give up some of our freedoms. And that's just nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. History has shown that Mark Sacco, how you doing, buddy? History has shown that this idea of concentrating power in elitists and trying to plan an economy and government getting involved in the free market doesn't work. Just doesn't work. And we're seeing the results of that now. I think we're seeing the results of the Biden administration coming in and over-regulating everything and trying to control things. And it's the result is the high inflation. And it's a problem, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and they believe that they can live a certain way, these elitists, but that you and I, they're going to create rules for us that they expect us to follow, but they don't have to follow them, and it's kind of disgusting. It's really, really disgusting, and that royal that's married to that gal here in the States, he spoke at the United Nations and he talked about climate change. So he flies from California to New York in a private jet with his wife to give the speech, and he's he's and he's criticizing you and me about the cars we drive, and then he gets on his private jet and flies back to California. It's just crazy. It's just awful. But what we must work hard to get elected freedom-loving candidates, conservatives who believe in freedom, who believe in the Constitution, who believe in those things that make this country great. And it's freedom, it's power in the people, because that creates incentive for us to create and add to this wonderful standard of living we have. Government. I think one of the things I learned from the pandemic is, it's in my opinion an example of how big government is not very effective. I think the bureaucrats in the pandemic messed it up so bad, and these are people whose entire careers have been spent being prepared for that moment. Billions of dollars spent for them to be prepared for that moment, and they did an awful job, just an awful job. And small government, keep it small, provide safety and security, which they don't want to do. The Democrats, and allow the American people with freedom to create and get this economy back on track. So are there any questions? I saw one, and I think I answered it. And we're coming up to the half-hour mark, but I'll answer any questions that anybody has. So, and if you don't have any questions, then so be it. And listen, we got a good crowd in here tonight. I'm going to be doing this every week. Spread the word. Remember the New Hampshire Advantage Pack. Go visit our website, nhadvantage.org. See what we're up to. I am for America first. I definitely am for America. I just got a question. Yes, I think it's right. We've got to get the economy back on track. I call my husband, friend. He can give you a prayer. Okay, Ruth. Hey, Ruth, I want to talk to you. Anyway, I've been meaning to call you, and I hope you're doing well. Ruth Ward, she's a state senator, awesome person, great state senator. Thanks for joining, Ruth. So we have to continue to fight for our freedom. We can't allow the elitists to frighten us into submission. I think Biden's gonna call climate change an emergency, and I actually said this when the pandemic was going on, that this was a trial run for the government to grab more power by designating things emergencies. And I think Biden's going to do that with respect to climate change and call it an emergency and grab more power. But we have to fight for our freedom. We have to fight for our liberty. Maybe I'll get criticized for using the word fight. I mean fight in a political sense. Certainly not suggesting violence, but in this day and age, I guess you got to watch how you use the word fight. We have a wonderful country here, and politicians who think that their job is to grab more power and control, that they know better than we do and they know better than the free market. We don't want politicians like that. We want politicians that believe in us, that believe in freedom, believe in the Constitution. There's there's no greater power than the power of an American unleashed by liberty and unburdened by government. And so with that, I want to thank everyone. Any more questions? All right, very good. Have a great night, everybody, and I really appreciate you joining. And I'll be back here next week at 7 o'clock. And if you have any suggestions for what you'd like me to talk about, if you have any suggestions about what you'd like me to talk about, email me at corkymessner@gmail.com. I think I'm going to have one of these on the election, the 2020 election, and what happened in the 2020 election. So at any rate, if you have any suggestions about what you'd like me to talk about, email me at corkymessner@gmail.com, and I'll get it on the schedule if there's room. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody. And live free or die.